Safety remains the primary concern of operators of airlines all over the world. In Nigeria, it's even bigger concern despite the relative period of normalcy and absence of anxiety being experienced by the aviation sector. Here, aviation operates under a comprehensive regulatory framework designed to ensure safety, security, and efficiency in air transportation. The primary legislation governing civil aviation is the Civil Aviation Act of 2022, which aligns national regulations with international standards set by the International Civil Aviation Organization. There are factors militating against the growth of Nigerian aviation, which include, but not exclusive to structural and infrastructural ones, which every stakeholder in the aviation space knows about, and the potential ones such as the constant need to maintain a heightened state of alertness, especially at a time that the country is going through unprecedented insecurity. For a conversation around all of that, we're now being joined by Dr. Alex Nwuba, who is the President, Aircraft Owners and Pilot Association, and the second Vice President, Aviation Safety Roundtable Initiative. With the festive season almost in full flow, we shall also focus on the cost of running operations by Nigerian airlines at this time. Good morning, Dr. Nwuba. Good to have you join us on the morning show.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here this morning.
All right. Okay, let's start this way. There's just a bit, to speak about that we'll like your thoughts on. But let's start with the issues that were raised at the last recently held Aviation Summit by FAN. And I'm sure that, stakeholders like your good self will be there.
I moderated, yes.
You moderated, absolutely. Yes. What will you consider to be the key takeaways in terms of stability, in terms of accountability, and in terms of safety? Was that a needed intervention at the time that it held? What are your takeaways from there?
Thank you for having me on the show this morning. I am hoping you're all having a great weekend, and we'll get into it.
We're enjoying it.
These are key questions, especially at this peak travel time in the aviation sector. Let's start with your opening comment, safety. Nigerians will be glad to hear this. It's not always the best news, but it is. It's a good news. Today, this month is 100 years of aviation in Nigeria, meaning from the very start of aviation in Nigeria. In that 100 years, the total lives lost in aviation-related incidents is less than 1,500 lives. With respect to safety. If you consider that to other modes of transportation, that's the number for weekly accidents on the road, etc. So I think that Nigerians should be confident and comfortable about the aviation sector in Nigeria starting out. The takeaway from FANAX were primarily investment. The federal government is looking and saying we need to deal with another issue you raised, the infrastructural issues. And so the best method would be to look at partnerships, concessions, and other forms of fundraising, of which many more are available. And so these have been the basis of those discussions that have taken place during FANAC.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, you've spoken a bit about safety, spoken a bit about investment, but Nigerians, most of us are customers, we're not the owners, we're not the pilots, and we're worried because in just a couple of days, today is the 29th of November, so by next week there is a new tax that is supposed to come for aviation travel in Nigeria, correct? I think it's called the Advanced Passenger Information System Levy. Nigerians already pay a lot of tax and levies when we travel. Why is that?
Well, that goes back to the core of the issue that even not just the consumers are complaining about, but the airlines themselves are talking about, which is that if you look at your ticket, if you break down the cost of your ticket, you would find that over 70% of the costs are related to charges and taxes. So if you look at the airfare portion, it's actually a very low number. Then when you start to look at these charges, and so the industry itself, not just consumers, are concerned about these charges and saying that the federal government needs to reduce these charges. The other problem with that is if you also look at it from the standpoint of beyond the charges, all of the related costs affected. You have an industry where the airlines are screaming that there's no money, they're having real challenges, but the airport operators, the service providers are reporting double-digit revenue growth. And so one must look at addressing this issue not from the airline point, but really the regulator and the government side, that there are too many charges, too many costs. If you look at it on average, in Nigeria, we pay 17% more for fuel charges, and fuel constitutes over 40% of the operating cost of an airline. So we've got to imagine that. So if you have service providers charging all these amounts, you have airports charging the amounts, and the worst part of it, that 50% of what the airports earn is taken away from the federal government at source to the single treasury account. So they're only left with 50% to provide the services. And if they're able to continue to provide those services, it means that the profits are excessive, the charges are excessive, and the consumer, like yourself, you spoke about, is paying for it.
Why shouldn't this be the key issues that your organization ought to be taking up with the minister? A lot of people have said that in the last 2 years or thereabout that the minister, Festus Keyamo, has not done badly. But then when you have a situation that you have described and the cost is being passed on, to passengers, what is affecting you getting the minister to reduce some of these charges, particularly if they're not comparable to what you have in other African states and elsewhere? Right. For example, when you talk about 17% more than elsewhere, why is it difficult to deal with this situation?
Well, the imperative is we are engaging the minister through the Aviation Safety Roundtable and other agencies on cost-related issues. But the argument that results from that is that we operate a free market system, so people are free to charge whatever they deem is appropriate for services. The federal government is also reaching out and saying, in the new year, we need to increase our tax base, we need to increase our collection base, we need to increase our revenue base. Because of shortfalls, we need to raise money for the general economy. And the unfortunate part of it, as passengers, you spoke as being a passenger, that no matter what the airline costs are, the airport costs are, service provider costs are, they're all borne by the passenger. The airlines are not subsidizing the operations for the operators. So it is imperative, and this program is a call to the federal government to look again at the cost structure of the aviation industry. First of all, taking away that 50% by the federal government is not a proper way to do this. Nigeria is a signatory to the International Civil Aviation Regulation, and there are regulations like 9626 that says that this is a self-funding industry. So the revenues that come to the airports and the agencies should be left in the agencies, not taken away from the federal agencies, which result in additional charges by them to cover that shortfall that has happened, which get passed on to the consumer as a tax. So we must relook at the whole structure of our charging structure and then come back and we can lower fares. If we lower fares, we improve connectivity. The reality is that we only use 10% of the airports on the continent, and that is one. The charge, then you have the interest rate regime. The minimum, of course, the central bank's rate is about 19%, which gets passed on to the banks. And so airlines pay 37% in financing costs for equipment and funding of the airline. This is also another cost passed on. So really, we must look at the entire cost. The problem in the aviation sector is the cost structure. This cost structure is what is passed on to the passenger.
Thank you. And what about people who say that, well, this is a problem for the elite or the middle class of Nigeria because we're not so connected anyways, and because the prices are so high that it seems that this is a family issue and rather than a public service issue? How would you counter that?
Well, I think that you hit on a very good point. Let's look at some statistics. In the United States, which is over 300 million people, it is statistically proven that the average American makes 2 trips a year. The average European makes 1 trip per year. The average African makes 0.02 trips per year, which means that we are not flying enough. And if we're not flying enough, then the economy is not stimulated enough. What is aviation? Aviation is a way to connect people, connect goods. The reality is that because of the lack of our functioning aviation sector, 80% of the goods that are generated, agricultural goods that are produced in some communities in the country, 80% is destroyed because of ground transportation infrastructure. So we do not have the facilities to move these goods. So we end up paying what the farmer produced 100%, we lose 80%, 20% comes to the market. That markup is paid by the consumer again. It is not the elite that is paying for this. If we expanded the aviation sector, more people will fly, more revenues will be generated, more goods will move, more agricultural produce will be produced and reach the market. So we are all as citizens paying for the lack of proper alignment that is taking place in the aviation sector.
And just to follow up on that very
sure.
quickly, what are your thoughts on state governors who are all trying to create their own airline carriers?
Airlines.
Yeah,
Well,
Airports.
airports.
Well, the reality of it is that you get bypassed. Let's start with airports. You get bypassed if you're not accessible. So if you fly in from abroad and you're an investor and you can only get to Lagos and then 6 hours to Ekiti State or 8 hours to Kogi State, those states get shortfalls in terms of economic investment and opportunities. You can only do so much by communication over networks. You have to actually go to these places, inspect them, see what the opportunities are. So it is a challenge for them not having airports. That's why they are all establishing airports. And then they establish these airports, and the reality is only 20% of the airports in the market are accessible. And so the idea is therefore, in order to you've made the investment in the airport so that people can access the state, then you have the challenge of people coming, and so they are saying the way to circumvent that challenge again is to establish airlines. What does that do? It increases the total capacity. We talk about the end of the year. This is the peak season. As you know, the lessor pulled some aircraft from an airline like Air Peace for tickets that have already been sold for this peak season, which will create some challenges for the industry as a whole. And the more we remove supply of equipment from the market, the higher the prices go, because we play the basic games of economic supply and demand. And so it is these issues that the states are establishing these airports and then establishing airlines to service the airports. The problem will come about is that when you look at the type of aircraft being deployed for these airports, which are startup growth airports, there's a bit of a misalignment. And so it's possible that the goals that have been established, which are good intention goals, may not be met.
Interesting. Let me come with two questions along that line. First will be, this is the peak travel season, as you mentioned. And you did say earlier that airlines don't subsidize passengers. Passengers pay
yes,
full.
absolutely.
Why then will an average passenger for the December season pay almost twice or thrice of the price that he paid in April, May, June, July that you didn't subsidize him?
Yes,
you are taking advantage. You are taking advantage of the traveler. And then secondly, which is also important, is how will you deal with the incessant? We're witnessing quite a lot these days. Unruly and difficult passengers. I'm not yet going to talk about, how they are now turned to ambassadors and stuff like that. But how are you dealing with that, malice that is growing by today?
Well, I said that the airlines do not subsidize passengers. But in reality, the airlines subsidize themselves. It is called cross-subsidization. As you know, you have a peak season in December.
Yes.
That would result in about February, very few people traveling. And even during this peak season, take an example, from Lagos to Anambra, people will arrive from Europe, they will then fly from Lagos to Anambra. The airplanes will be full, and on the return leg, very few people are coming to Lagos in that season. You have a flight to Kogi, for example, one way. Even coming from abroad, many people are coming from abroad and very few are leaving the country. And then you have the periods between these peak seasons where demand is low, when airlines have to offer promotional tickets and lower fares like you described earlier. And so from an economics point of view, airline economics point of view, what you then have, I called cross-subsidization, is that I increase my fares to fill the cost gaps and fill the revenue shortages that will result from this low demand period. And so you end up paying a higher fare during the peak season, so the airlines make enough money to pay for the points when there's very low operation. So it is a form of subsidization, but not the traditional form where the airline is offering a discount, which they do during off-peak season. Then you talk about the issue of security and unruly passengers.
Yes.
You also notice a pattern that once the passenger growth starts to happen, a lot more people get very frustrated by the services at the airport, the choke points that happen, the way the airplanes are filled up, the service delivery and service levels. And so what the airlines are saying, for one of the key ones was a modification of the regulation that said you turn off your phone before departure.
Yeah.
And it was a function under the regulations. Individual airlines had a policy when you turned on and turned off your phone. You also had the situation where you had point-to-point availability. So for example, when you went on Emirates, the phone works on the airplane because the service is available for your internet, etc. And so you had all of these various varying principles available made by the airlines because it's a self-regulating industry. And that led to you get on an airplane, they don't tell you to turn off your phone. You get on another one, they say turn off your phone. And so the regulator said, let's just have a policy of turn off your phone. Of course, I was at that security meeting where that decision was made, and the question was, well, how does that apply to airlines that have the ability to support your phone, and the airplane is equipped to have that?
Yes.
But so for simplicity, the regulation was made that on every airplane, turn off your phone. But the real regulations apply to your destination regulations. So the regulations are different when you're going from Lagos to London than you are going from London to Lagos. The Nigerian regulation applies when you're coming to Nigeria, and the UK regulations apply when you're flying to UK. But not to complicate things, it's simply turn off your phone. And then people don't obey those instructions, and that's the beginning of unruly behavior. And then just before the program started, you had the idea of a careless cabin crew offering a passenger 6 bottles of wine. Naturally, that is about to lead to some kind of unruly behavior. And then you also had the incidents of people sitting in the VIP lounge where there's free access to alcohol, and they're taking this alcohol and they're getting on the plane, and you're told fasten your seatbelt and be of good behavior. But they're no longer in control of their behavior. But the regulations are tough. You spoke about, or you chose not to speak about, ambassadorship and other kinds of rewards for bad behavior.
You have liberty to speak about it.
But the regulator is saying we've set a bad example by those examples, and we're going to toughen up. And so Nigerians need to be at their best behavior because the rules are just about to get tougher.
Will it get tougher with celebrities exchanging blows inside the aircraft?
Well, that is rather a sensitive issue, because if the gentleman in question is selectively prosecuted, I will call it selectively prosecuted, because the public perception is that he is a public advocate. And so when you select him for prosecution, then you're working, obviously government is doing what government does, protect its own and prosecute the common man. So really that's a challenge, but it will be addressed in one form or the other. But the regulations as they apply now means that nobody is selected to be given preferential treatment, and so everybody will be sanctioned in the same manner in a much tougher environment.
That's very hard for some of us to swallow, because we did see a woman nearly stripped bare and then put in prison for this behavior, but even I would say possibly less violent behavior in the same, this is the same cycle, it's in the same period for us to see these images. And so it does feel like there are preferential treatments if you're a man, if you're a celebrity, if you're well known, than if you're a regular Nigerian. And that's the problem that regular Nigerians have, is that the law does not apply the same to the rich, the wealthy, the famous, than to the regular man.
I think that what we have to accept that happened at the very beginning stages, and the regulator was coming to grips with how to handle a very complex situation. But then with it recurring, and obviously women should be given the higher priority, I should say, because we're a civilized society. But this happened at the very beginning. It caused a security conference in which I participated and presented a paper at. And so the regulator is coming to terms with the fact that this is a growing problem and must be addressed. And that's what we're going to see, we hope to see, in the later applications of the law. The laws are there, but we wanted to give it a softer landing at the very beginning when we were still, as an industry, from the regulators, not the industry players, but from the regulator's side, he was a bit perplexed as to handle this kind of complexity with the nature of relationships we have in our society. But I think that everybody is becoming wiser that kind of action is resulting in a growing problem that must be addressed.
All right, Dr. Nwuba, I mean, it's sad that we have to leave now. I was going to quickly ask you about why do Nigerians keep paying twice the amount that a Togolese or a Ghanaian or a Sierra Leonean will pay from an average trip from West Africa to Europe and back, whereas in Nigeria it's usually much more than any other.
I think it's the levies and taxes, and we want to
widen
our.
Absolutely, it's the same issue. Yes, it is.
And that's the monster that we have to contend with.
That's why I say we must reimagine our industry. We look at it from the ground up and fix many of the challenges that are surmountable. We call these difficulties and challenges, but they are not. They're just a matter of looking at the problem and providing a solution to them.
All right, Dr. Alex Nwuba, we want to thank you for joining us
joining us
on
this
on
My
the
pleasure.
show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you.